The animated series RWBY has a terrible habit of wasting villain potential, or just not bothering to develop interesting character arcs. And one of those arcs that is currently suffering is my favorite character, Mercury Black. So for those of you that are new to this or how this is going to work, there are major spoilers ahead. So if you haven't watched the series yet, up to volume 5 or 6, I highly recommend you do not watch this video because I will be discussing plot details and things that kind of go along with that. So, if you're new to RWBY, save this for later. Go finish the show, enjoy yourself, and then come back and check out what I have to say. So Mercury Black was a character introduced at the end of Volume 1 as a statue, and he had his first real appearance in Volume 2. He touted himself as a clearly Sasuke-esque character with an unusual fighting style that captured the imagination. But even more than that, it was his chemistry with his partner Emerald that really made him interesting, both of them being cold-blooded and vicious. Exactly what we'd expect from a direct underlings of the main villain. Volume 2 saw these characters taking somewhat of a back seat until Mercury decided to challenge Pyrrha Nikos to a duel in order to deduce the nature of her ability. Previously, it had been established that Pyrrha Nikos was basically the best of the best, easily the best in the Beacon Academy, with the skill and knowledge to back it up. So when this relatively unknown character stepped into the ring and proceeded to handle her solo, it was straight up awesome. Mercury's fighting style was unique in its own right, appearing to be a complete opposite of Yang's, which led us to believe that they would eventually become rivals, and to some extent, that latter eventually became true. However, Mercury's character was an overall mystery, and he was even described by the first voice actor as being kind of a hipster douchebag. But fans saw something else entirely. He was the basis for what we assumed Emerald's ability was, capable of besting our protagonist without much effort. Later on, we learn of his analytical abilities, deducing Pyrrha's ability that she had cleverly woven into a complex fighting style to give her a competitive edge. But it wasn't until Volume 3 that Mercury really had a chance to shine. This was also when the voice actor was changed to a fellow named Yuri, which is kind of funny since Mercury was originally considered a Sasuke ripoff, and Yuri is Sasuke's English dub voice actor. However, Yuri turned out to be a great fit for the role. So starting off with this volume, we have Mercury witnesses Crow and reports back to Cinder, telling her that he smelled like his dad after a long day. Crow, being an alcoholic, this gave us some insight into his character, or at least his background. Mercury's father was also an alcoholic, and it was relatable for a lot of people. It helped establish that the character in a new and interesting way. He wasn't just some twisted hipster douchebag. He was a troubled child that grew up into a sadistic teenager. Mercury and Emerald are waged against Koko and Yatsuhashi of Beacon, where in an impressive display of combat ability, Mercury single-handedly bests both of them, initially displaying a control of dust that fans would argue over whether or not was his semblance for the next few volumes. It was safely assumed that Mercury could have easily won the match on his own, which was great. Koko and the other seniors at Beacon were described to be on a completely different level initially, and then enter this lone stranger that manages to outmaneuver, out-hit, and outpace Beacon's bright heroes. Mercury is slotted to fight Yang next, and everyone was waiting for this awesome finale. Most of us knew that Yang could not lose, mostly in part to her semblance and in part to her main character immunity. But there was hope that the writers might subvert our expectations and reveal to us Mercury's semblance that gets him the upper hand at the last moment, and perhaps victory. Their fight is fast-paced and they are seemingly matched equally, both exchanging blows until Yang uses her semblance to gain the upper hand and deliver an aura-shattering blow at a crucial moment. This later becomes her signature move. Mercury is down and Yang has won. Unknown to Yang, Emerald uses her semblance to provide the image of Mercury launching an attack at her after their fight is over. Yang responds, seemingly shattering Mercury's kneecap mid-attack, and the crowd is awash with boos and gasps as it is revealed that Yang attacked Mercury while he was down and not resisting. The flashback comes and we see Cinder recruiting Emerald and Mercury, but most importantly we see that Mercury has killed his own father, Marcus Black, who was a legendary assassin. It wasn't too hard for many fans to put two and two together. Mercury was an abused child, trained by an assassin to be an assassin, and eventually got fed up and fought back. Lyrics for Emerald and Mercury's fight theme, I'm the One, also hinted towards this, with such lines as, I'm the one that was born in a nightmare, a murderer's son. We can understand why Mercury turned to this life. It wasn't unwarranted, he was raised in it, became a product of it, and was extremely proficient with his methods. This was also where we learned that Mercury's legs are artificial, and while there is some speculation as to whether he did this to himself in order to defeat his father, given the bloodied bandages at his side suggesting a recent surgery, or if his father did this in order for him to be an even more efficient assassin, perhaps against his will. It was an interesting revelation regardless for audiences, and apparently a nod at his Hermes lore. After we find out that Mercury was in fact not injured and faked it, presumably faking the loss as well in order to bastardize Beacon further, he takes a back seat, only reappearing to antagonize RWBY, hinting at their intentions and confirming her doubt of his injuries. This was an interesting interaction because Mercury appears to be able to keep up with RWBY's speed, which was an impressive feat at the time. Later, he is shown relishing in the destruction of Beacon and filming it with his scroll. Though there is a little significance here, we see that Emerald feels bad, whereas Mercury does not. Emerald carries out her duties out of obligation to Sender, whereas Mercury appears to do it for fun. Unfortunately, after this, the writing begins to go significantly downhill. The introduction of Volume 4 saw a whole new plethora of villains, all of whom are presumably on Sender's level, which unintentionally diminishes the value of both Mercury and Emerald. Their introduction shows them being terrified and talked down to. Now both of them are appearing to regret everything they've done until now and the decisions that have led them to where they are. And it just doesn't feel like the same characters. Not to mention their character models have changed and not in a positive way. Whereas most characters appear to be more refined or mature, Emerald and Mercury look as if less effort was put into their creation. I could probably fit all of Emerald and Mercury's scenes into a less than 5-minute segment for all of Volume 4. Now in most cases this doesn't really matter too much since the story is focused elsewhere. However, there's a reason I'm not too okay with this. Introducing a powerful string of characters means that you need to properly establish that the protagonists are capable of exceeding the foes they once struggled against, preferably after they've trained or discovered the key to defeating the opponent's ability or developed some new and interesting technique. In doing this, you can safely get rid of characters that you no longer need, provide the character with closure, and hint that the protagonists are now more capable and growing in power. This doesn't happen. Instead, throughout the volume, the protagonists gain new control of their abilities, with none having proper development other than Ren and Nora. Characters like Jean, who deserve to be fleshed out and given more power, are instead undermined and swept aside. Yang, who has refused to do anything since the fall of Beacon, refusing to even put on a freshly made prosthetic arm. After she briefly manages to overcome her issues, she is seen training with her father, doing the same training that they did before she went to Beacon, allegedly. In this training, he informs her that her semblance is nothing more than a temper tantrum, and that she needs to use it more sparingly and think more. Immediately, Yang manages to do this with no struggle at all. That is bad writing. This causes a few problems later on down the line, but I'll get to that. It doesn't quite feel like this person is Mercury.
Hey, ugly.
I mean, what? This just seems entirely out of character, like they decided to write him off as a schoolyard bully and not a smart one at that. All of his dialogue is just cringy and strange.
But I don't believe we've met.
We're the guys you should be afraid of.
I doubt anyone should be afraid of you.
Oh yeah? Tell that to Quiet.
Their next big appearance is during the finale, where they confront the gang after being teleported there by Raven's semblance. Mercury's dialogue here is still strange.
Come on, guys. Is that any way to greet your old friends?
But this brought a bit of hope. A lot of fans were hoping for a rematch against Mercury and Yang, whereas Yang perhaps sees Mercury is missing both of his legs, and maybe they have a moment of understanding. This was also the point where we hoped Mercury would show his semblance. And sure, they are quickly matched up again, but...
Hey there, Blondie. I'm thinking you owe me an apology for my leg. Don't you think?
Is this even the same character? Weiss is briefly hurt and everyone stops fighting, even Mercury, even though he's a cold-blooded killer. Then, I mean, this happens?
You want to get to them? You're going to have to get through all of us.
And no, that isn't Mercury's semblance, it's Emerald's. I know I can get through this. I know I can.
You okay?
No. I'm angry.
Ruby shows up and she's angry. And then this gem happens.
Uh-oh. What are you gonna do now?
Whatever it takes to shut you up.
And it seems like Mercury really doesn't care too much about fighting, and more prefers throwing in snappy one-liners and then getting embarrassed or insulted by the protagonists. Then this stuff happens, and I swear to God, Yang runs towards the vault, and it's like all the agility and speed is gone from both Mercury and Emerald, and they resort to very poor pass interference tactics. She manages to grab Yang's arm. She flashes her eyes red, her semblance activated, but instead just detaches her arm. This was supposed to show that Yang has matured and no longer intends to use her semblance for everything, but it just comes off as bad writing. And it shows that her arm literally detaches from the socket at will with just some strange design. It's like a Barbie doll. Then everyone is like, "Ruby, what's the plan?" And her plan is, So Mercury says what I've been thinking this whole volume. Now,
You've gotta be kidding me.
you might be expecting, I assume, an interesting fight sequence. Nope. They've been beaten off screen. Mercury is even on his knees. And then they run away once they realize Cinder has failed, Emerald displaying some really sad and helpless traits right here. Then we're on to Volume 6. Now, if you haven't seen it yet, spoilers ahead, and I'm not going to include any clips because there isn't really anything worth clipping, and it's still too close to the release date, and I don't want to get copyright strike flagged like I've been getting, so... The only key part of this is that we learn a little about Mercury's backstory. He was trained constantly by his father, pushed to be the strongest, and once he unlocked his semblance, his father stole it with his own, claiming that he would return it to Mercury once he was strong enough. He never did, however, which presumably drove Mercury to killing him. Mercury claims that he has had to work harder than anyone, how without a semblance he was always at a disadvantage. And when you think back on it, yeah, he really was. But he always comes out on top. His skill was always unparalleled. Now his skill is entirely absent. He's been belittled and mocked by almost everyone he encounters. No one regards him as the guy that could single-handedly knock around multiple main characters. Now he's been reduced to being defeated off-screen. This writing of his semblance and father obviously predates the current writing, and they threw it in the mix just to add a little variety to his character. But it was a great addition. If only they hadn't wasted his character so much. Now earlier I talked about why not having heroes naturally progress becomes a problem, and here it is.
It's false advertising.
Mercury and Emerald are defeated off-screen and forced into a corner. We are not shown how, only told it has happened. This means that Mercury and Emerald are no longer a threat to the main characters. It also means that the main characters are on a completely different level now, without any indicator of why.
Don't even want to try?
What's the point? You're a world-renowned fighter. We're obviously leagues apart.
Next time you may want to think a little harder before choosing an opponent.
I'll be sure to do that.
Yes, they've fought Grimm, but this was their first time fighting experienced, powerful enemies, and they excelled without effort. Some might say this was due to Volume 4 and 5 just having terrible fight scenes, with the exception of only a few where the budget really kicked in. This meant that they couldn't focus on the side fights and could only focus on the main, pivotal moments. While I tend to agree, I also feel that they simply had no direction to take when it comes to villains, especially villains with established complicated traits. We see this with Hazel. Now hear me out on this. Hazel at first appears to be this monstrous, interesting villain, but his motivation for everything was his sister wanted to become a huntress and died during a training mission. Instead of understanding that she died as a huntress hopeful, and that was her dream, he feels that it is entirely Ozpin's fault for deluding her with this dream and saying that it's possible that she could become one, and therefore, he kills people who have similar dreams. Even this motivation just seems entirely misplaced and doesn't make sense. Why would this drive him to murder countless people and try to destroy the world? Why wouldn't he respect his sister's wishes? Whereas Mercury and Emerald have complicated, established reasoning for everything that they do. Mercury was an abused child who had everything stolen from him, something that some people can relate to. Emerald was an abandoned child who had to steal in order to survive, something people can also relate to. Whereas Mercury followed Cinder for fun, Emerald felt a deep emotional debt to her for bringing her out of poverty. They should not be portrayed as whiny, pathetic, and helpless children. Once they have had their backstories established, they need to be either defeated or killed. You flesh out the character and then you toss them aside. However, the main characters need to earn this victory, not have it given to them. RWBY has a terrible habit of wasting or corrupting perfectly good villain characters, and there is more to come, and it always seems like this reasoning is just to make the protagonists seem like they are better, and it just doesn't make sense to me, and the only conclusion I can come down to is bad writing. So that's all for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you didn't, be sure to let me know why so I can hopefully change future videos to be a little better. If you did enjoy it and want more like this, I plan to do videos like this often, so subscribe and click on that bell so you'll be the first to know when I upload it. And as a bit of fun, comment below on what you think Mercury's semblance was, or perhaps if he would ever get it back. And also, do you feel like Mercury and Emerald will be having a redemption arc in the upcoming volumes? Do you think that instead of turning evil or being defeated, they will just turn good at the last moment? Let me know.
What's with that?
I like the pictures. No pictures.